Rotary. I'm honored to have as our keynote speaker, who was gracious enough to accept my invitation several months ago. We've been working on this, trying to arrange this particular meeting, and it just so happens that today we were able to make it work. I'm reminded of three college graduates who were friends all the way through college, and they were sort of political minded, except for this one friend who was an independent. The other two, there was a Republican and a Democrat, and they were trying to convince him to take sides. They've been trying to convince him for their entire college tenure, the entire 4 years. Of course, the Republican wanted him to become a Republican, and the Democrat wanted him to become a Democrat, and the young man who was independent said, well, I'm going to vote independent. And they queried him as to why. And he said, well, my father was an independent, and his father was an independent, and his father was an independent, and his father before him was an independent. And so they replied, well, suppose your father and all his ancestors were horse thieves. He said, well, in that case, I'd be a Republican or a Democrat. I promised Steve I would be nice. Congressman Steve Scalise proudly represents the 1st Congressional District of Louisiana, which stretches from the beautiful North Shore of Lake Pontchartrain and the culturally distinct New Orleans suburbs to the vibrant bayous and wetlands abundant in natural resources. He was elected to Congress in May of 2008 after serving in the Louisiana State Legislature from 1996 to 2008. He currently serves his colleagues as the House Majority Whip, the 3rd highest position for House Republicans. A native of Jefferson Parish, Congressman Scalise is a graduate of Archbishop Rummel High School and Louisiana State University, where he earned a degree in computer science and a minor in political science. Scalise is married to the former Jennifer Latoul, and they have 2 children, Madison and Harrison. Ladies and gentlemen of the Rotary, visiting friends, it is my honor to welcome our keynote speaker, the Honorable Steve Scalise.
Well, thanks so much, Norman, for that warm and unique introduction. That was the nice version. I'd hate to see if I didn't ask him to keep it kind. But we dear friends that go back a long way, and he's been talking to me about coming and speaking to the Rotary for a while. So I'm glad we got to make it work. Look forward to kind of hearing from you some of the things y'all might be interested in. I'll just share a few things about maybe some of the things that we do in Washington that you don't hear about as much, and let you know a little bit about the recovery. I'll ask if I can hear. I do want to thank everybody for the prayers. For those of you that have prayed for my recovery, I've definitely come a long way over the last year and a month. It's been quite a year, but so many people here in Southeast Louisiana have said so many warm prayers and other things. I appreciate that so much. It helped me get through really tough times, and during the recovery, there were a lot of different steps along the way that I had to relearn how to walk, and then I had to just try to figure out how to try to get some of the mobility and being able to go back to work, go back and do the things you love doing. Well, this all happened in preparation for the congressional baseball game, and so they decided to have the game on the 1-year anniversary. June 14th is when they played the game, kind of pay tribute to the recovery for all of us. I mean, I was shot, but there were others who were shot. There were a lot of people who were shot at who fortunately made it through. All of us made it through, except the shooter, which is truly miraculous. And there are many miracles and I've talked about those miracles along the way. There was also great heroism. The United States Capitol Police, some who are here with me today, not only risked their lives, but were shot at during the whole shootout and shot and still kept at it and saved all of us. And there were over a dozen members of Congress who would have been executed that day. So if we can join in thanking the United States Capitol Police for the and continue to do. And so I got to see real heroism. I got to see real miracles along the way, and then benefited from the prayers of so many people. So I continue to recover, but continue to appreciate all of that. And we did play the game again, and one of the motivations I had in my recovery was that I wanted to just be able to get back out there and practice with my colleagues again, put on a uniform, understanding I can't quite move around as fast as I used to. And frankly, if they needed me, I used to be one of the best base runners. I stole home plate on Cedric Richmond, by the way. And, Cedric is the star of the game every year, and they give him the MVP, and he wins the game most years. We did beat him the year before I was shot. I played in that game, and we won the game. And then last year, I didn't play, and we didn't win the game, and I told Cedric, the game I played, and we won. So we have this own personal rivalry. So he does really well, but I do well against him, and that's really my benchmark. And so I was wearing the Romulan uniform. I wear a different uniform every year, and I was wearing the Romulan uniform a few years ago, and I got a hit, I stole second on him, then I stole third on him, so I'm at third base, and he throws a wild pitch, and I steal home on him. And the Roll Call magazine, one of the DC magazines, takes a picture, and this great picture of me like halfway down the third baseline as I'm stealing home successfully on Cedric, and he's got this grimace on his face like, I am never going to hear the end of it. So I took that picture and blew it up in like an 8x, it's almost a life size, one of those things you put on your wall. And I've got extras if you want to put it on your wall. So anytime people from New Orleans come up, they always, Cedric wins the game, Cedric. And then there's this picture of me, and Cedric's like, Scalise, again, a group from New Orleans came up, and they told me that you showed him the picture. So I'm going to get like pictures of both Cedric and I signing that picture, and we'll auction that off for a local charity. So I'm offering up on my side. We'll see if we can get him to. But Cedric and I, one of the things I want to talk about is what you don't hear about a lot in Washington, and that is the times when we work together, Republicans and Democrats, and especially the relationships that Cedric and I have maintained. It started when we were in the State House, and it's been chronicled a lot in Washington. CBS did a big segment on their morning news just a few weeks ago of the relationship between he and I. And I think it should serve as a reminder for how we should treat each other, the civility that we should have, because there is a lot of vitriol in the language. You do not have to disagree. This idea that, gee whiz, if everybody just got along, that's not America. I mean, we all have our own viewpoints. We can get along on certain issues, but there are issues where we really do have differences of opinion. And it's always been that way throughout our country's history, and it's always going to be that way. I think the difference is how we treat each other when we disagree. And that's where I do think we've seen a breakdown over the last few years. And it's not a new development. I mean, over 100 years ago, historically, two members of Congress had a duel and shot each other. I mean, that's not how you do things. But I do think we should at least respect how our different viewpoints are developed, and then you try to work on the areas where you can. When I talk to Cedric about areas where I want to work with him, when we're bringing the bill to repeal and replace Obamacare, I think it's a great bill that we passed out of the House. But it's not a phone call I'm going to make to Cedric and say, hey, can you help me with this? Because I know where he can and can't work with me. But on areas like coastal restoration, dredging the Mississippi River, advancing economic opportunities for regions like New Orleans. We've always been able to work together. Just recently, to renew the flood insurance program. It was about to expire, and we've got some people in my own party who want the program to go away. And look, I'd love to have a very functioning, healthy, vibrant, competitive marketplace for flood insurance. We just don't have that right now. There's one place you can go, and that's the National Flood Insurance Program, and in many cases, the federal government requires you to have it. So if the federal government's requiring you to have it, and the only place you can go to get it is the NFIP, then you better make the NFIP work while you try to develop a private marketplace. And that's the bill we were able to pass. And on that day, because the chairman of the committee, who's a colleague of mine and a Republican, is against it vehemently, I couldn't go to him to work with this on. I went to a colleague of mine from New Jersey. We built a very big coalition of members, both Republican and Democrat, to keep this program going. Tom MacArthur and I had the bill, but we weren't going to have enough Republican votes to pass it, and I called Cedric. And he was very happy to help. It was something that was important for both of us, for both of our districts. And it was a very bipartisan vote, by the way, over 350 votes. And so we've done that many times, and you don't hear about it a lot because it's not the big partisan fight. Gee whiz, even cutting taxes became a partisan issue. It shouldn't. And it's gotten our economy back on track. It's helped make our country competitive again. You know, you're seeing great improvement in economic opportunities for everybody. Whether you're low income, you're trying to become part of the American dream, or you've already succeeded and your business is in jeopardy because you're competing globally and the company in Ireland is paying 15% and you're paying 35%. We had to fix that, and we did. But on those issues, you hear a lot about that because it's a big partisan fight. But on the issues where we actually work together like 21st century cures, a bill that passed at the end of President Obama's term, and we worked with him and he signed it into law. A bill that I think 5–10 years from now you might see as the impetus behind curing major diseases like cancer or Alzheimer's. That was a very bipartisan vote, but unfortunately got absolutely no press coverage because the routine things we do are in many cases bipartisan. And we need to build more relationships, I think, like the ones that Cedric and I have, where when we know we can't be on the same page on an issue, we don't go and try to attack the other person's character or integrity. We respect those differences. I'll still fight to get the bill passed if I think it's right for the country and for my district. And he's going to fight to try to defeat it if he thinks it's bad for the country and bad for his district. But we ought to respect those differences, because if we do respect those differences, then on the areas where we can agree, we can work together. But if I was questioning his integrity and his character on this vote, then tomorrow when we got the vote to actually try to strengthen the revenue sharing that's important to restore Louisiana's coast, where we do need to put together a bipartisan coalition, and we have, I wouldn't be able to make that phone call and get his support if I was attacking him personally on a different issue where we disagree. And I think that's the message we need to share with all of our colleagues, Republican and Democrat. And again, I did want to feature some of those things because more than not, the votes that we pass on the House floor are bipartisan votes, but it's the big issues, the high-profile issues, where we're at different sides that you only hear about. And so it's been quite a ride these last few years, especially when I got elected majority whip in 2014, and the things that we're able to do because of a position like that. And by the way, I do have an office. If you want to come up and visit, I have an office that Abraham Lincoln used to use, and I renamed it the Lincoln Room, and it's quite a lot of history there. There's a trap door, and if you watch House of Cards, you wonder what does the whip do? I get the votes to pass bills, and sometimes you got to be a little more vocal to colleagues that don't quite hear the message the right way. But there's a trap door in there, and legend has it that that's where the British came up when they burned the Capitol down in the War of 1812. So what they did is they sealed up the entrance, so there's no entrance there, but they also covered the stairwell. So it's a spiral staircase, and there's a trap door in my office where if you lift it up, you can actually go down to the bottom and see where it all started. So it's kind of a lot of neat history, and it's neat to share that history. And when we have friends come up from back home, I just had Chef John Foltz ask a few months ago, he said, "Steve, I want to come up," and I'm using a dialect that was different than his. "Steve, I want to come up and cook for your friends." So he said he wanted to come up and cook some Cajun food for my colleagues, and so we worked it out. A few weeks ago he came up, and man, you want to talk about filling up that room. It's right off of the House floor. It's a room called Statuary Hall, which used to be where Congress met in the 1800s. So a lot of great history, rich history. So Lincoln served for one term in the 1840s. He served one term in Congress from Illinois, and then after that term he left, went back to Illinois, and then the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and then ultimately ran for president. But he used to hang out in that room. And so Chef Foltz came up, and brought his crew, and they cooked some unbelievable food, and it was delicious, and it got just lapped up. I mean, there was none left after about now. We had over 100 members of Congress came through and surely enjoyed it. So we love sharing our culture with people from all around the country, different walks of life, and that's a lot of fun to do too. But let me know if y'all want to come up and see some of this great history that I get to be a part of. So with that, why don't we open up and take some questions? And don't be shy. Yeah.
You got one for governor?
No. I'm running for re-election right now. What the ballot November? I've got 5 opponents, by the way. So I'm very focused on that and helping to keep the majority, and that's going to be a challenge too. But we're, allows me to get around the country a lot and meet a lot of my colleagues in their home districts, which I enjoy doing, to go see, get to know other members better. You build stronger relationships. So that's where I'm focused.
One other question.
You gonna follow up to that?
How do you explain the president's style?
How do you explain the president's style? I've gotten to know President Trump really well, and the Twitter stuff that you see out there, that's what gets the big attention. But frankly, when you're in meetings with him, he is all business and very warm and personal. He came to visit me at the hospital. He called me a number of times just to check in on me. And so there is that side of him that you don't get to see as publicly. But just looking at the tax cut bill, healthcare was the same. I mean, when we're down to the wire on a big bill, a high-profile bill, they're calling me all the time. Like, Steve, do we have the votes? And on bills like that, you're building a coalition just to pass the tax cut bill. You think, gee whiz, I mean, you've got a bill to cut everybody's tax rate. That ought to be easy to pass, right? Well, first of all, not one Democrat voted for it, and some of my Republican colleagues were against it too. And so you have a very narrow window then if you've got maybe 15 Republicans already said they're going to be against it, every Democrat's against it, so you need 218 votes. You might only have 230 that are available to you that said, they're not absolutely against it. And so you work through the policy, and I love working on policy. So I'll work very closely with the chairman of the committees of jurisdiction, and I'll pull groups of members in a room at a time, and then ultimately the president will say, look, Steve, how can I help? And I'll tell you how. We've got 6 members that have a question about this issue where you can maybe break an impasse. And he'll say, bring them down to the White House. So we'll go down to the White House and go in the Oval Office or go into the cabinet room or one of the other places where, depending on how many members we have, and we'll just go through the issues and try to figure out how to get a resolution. And the president's very directly involved in that, in those meetings, and it's all business. So that's the side of him I see. I don't follow him on Twitter. People seem to have a lot of fun with that, but it's a medium that he's used very successfully to kind of get his message out on other things, or maybe to change the narrative that's out there in the national media. But when you're in meetings with him, it's all business, and he's very, he asks how I'm doing. He's very engaging in that way.
With the current battles over trade, do you have any concerns that our ports or agriculture or oil and gas might end up being collateral damage in these international disputes?
There's a lot of negotiation going on with a lot of countries, and the president, he made it clear during the campaign that he didn't like NAFTA, for example. So there were a lot of people that thought, okay, he's just going to pull out of NAFTA. He didn't do that. I think that's a good thing that he didn't. I support free trade agreements. But what he has done is said, I want to go back and focus on the deals that were cut that he thinks, and I would agree in many parts, are bad for America. And so Mexico, in NAFTA, there's definitely some big winners that America got out of that. We won in a lot of areas. Ag is one area where we're able to open up new markets in Mexico, but there's still some barriers to entry. And so he wants to try to renegotiate and make those deals better. You're seeing that with Canada, and now you're seeing it with a lot of European and Asian countries as well. And frankly, if we can go get better deals, then it's good that we had this negotiation. I don't want to see a trade war. And what he said to Europe is, hey, look, let's knock down all of our tariffs. Go to 0 on everybody's tariffs. And it's funny, when you watch this, it really shows you who gets the benefit of some of these trade deals. I mean, use Canada, for example. Name a Canadian product that has trouble getting access to American markets. Really, America, we make it very easy to do business in America. A lot of countries around the world, and it's not just our enemies, I mean, a lot of our allies have big barriers to entry, make it really hard for some American products to be sold in those countries. And so it's exposed that. Now let's go make it better, hopefully without having a trade war. And so it's high stakes negotiations that are going on, and he is negotiating directly with a lot of these countries. I hope we're able to get resolved and keep the economy growing. I know in the back, yeah, way in the back over there.
I don't want to hit a topic that's too broad, but the one thing I see is that the last major hurdle, big issue that we deal with is immigration. So you guys just can't seem to get past this. And I heard DACA and just other different, sanctuary city issues. I mean, how do we get to finish on that? I mean, and I know that's hard to answer, but
Yeah, immigration has been probably the most complicated issue to deal with, because even within the Republican conference, there are many different camps. On an issue like DACA, if it was just people that wanted to solve it in different ways, that would be one thing, but there's multiple ways that people would like to solve it. You've got everything from, limiting, how do you define what is the DACA population? The Secretary of Homeland Security will tell you there's 690,000 people who are here in America today who signed up for DACA. Then you say, well, what about the people that didn't sign up but were eligible for DACA? And maybe you get to 1.8 million. And then there's some people that say, no, we don't want any limitation. Let's let everybody who's already here illegally just have access to a new path to citizenship or amnesty. And so you get all of those different coalitions within the Republican conference, and then if you were working with Democrats, and we've tried to work with Democrats on this. I think they made a calculation that they don't want to work with President Trump to give him a win on immigration. Because early off, Chuck Schumer was actually negotiating with President Trump on a way to build the wall and solve the DACA population. And they were actually close to an agreement, and then all of a sudden, Schumer started getting hit from the left of people saying, don't negotiate with Trump at all. And so he walked away, and when we brought a couple of different bills to the House floor, we had a few different bills to solve the problem in different ways, and none of them could get a majority of Republicans. Not a majority, we got a majority of Republicans, but none of them could get 218 Republicans, because the Democrats decided they're going to vote no on anything. So we brought two bills to the floor. Not one Democrat voted for it, and unfortunately it became a partisan issue. This should not be a partisan issue. When you talk to people, and I'll just give you an example of what our approach was, that kind of the rough idea, and both bills approached it from different ways. First we said, let's secure America's border. And if you poll that, that's an 80-20 issue. Security, I mean, there are some people that say open borders. This idea of abolishing ICE, which I think is crazy, there's a core of Democrats in the House that believe we should get rid of the interior enforcement agents. That's crazy, but there are people that really believe that. So let's say you put that on the side. We want to strengthen our interior enforcement. We want border security, and it's in our bill. Then you say, okay, what about the wall? Okay, let's fund the wall, but not just a wall. Talk about technology. There's a lot of technology that we have available to us to figure out ways to stop human trafficking, stop terrorists, stop the drug trade that happens across our border. And so you deal with that, and then you say, okay, what do you do about DACA? So we said, okay, let's say not just the people that came here under DACA and signed up, but what about the people that were maybe afraid to sign up, but they're here? All right, if you said those people would be eligible just like anybody else for a merit-based immigration system, not a special line, but there are already people waiting in line. By the way, we're the most generous country in the world. We let 1 million people into our country legally every single year. No country's even close to that number. So this idea that, geez, America doesn't want people to come here, we're letting more people into our country legally than anybody else in the world. So nobody else has the ability to say America's not open to immigrants. But let's have a system that works for legal people. One of the things we looked at is we've got a lot of problems, loopholes. If a felon is here, let's say somebody comes here illegally and then commits a felony, rape, and they serve whatever their time is. Let's say they serve 4 years for rape, and then they get out, they do their time, but they're still here illegally. Now, our Secretary of Homeland Security would like to send them back to the country they came from. In many cases, we can't do that because of the immigration laws we have. The laws say you have to get an agreement with the country to take that person back. So if you can imagine the call, hey, we just got this guy that is already here illegally, he just got out of prison for committing rape, and he served his time, will you take him back? We have to ask permission. Why should we have to do that? We tried to change that, couldn't get the votes to pass that. Other loopholes in things like the visa lottery, where right now 55,000 people a year come to America every single year, legally, names that we just pull out of a hat. Well, at the same time, we've got people, let's say at Stanford University or at LSU, that are graduating in engineering or computer science or some other field where we need more workers in those fields. And we're educating them. And at the end of their education, they're here on a visa. And at the end of that education, they get their degree, we force them to leave America and go back to their country and compete against us. Why not take those lotteries that we're literally pulling names out of a hat and turn it into a merit-based system where you take those 55,000 visas and use them to solve the DACA problem. Use them to break down some of the other barriers to legal immigration where we're forcing people to leave our country that we should be trying to keep here. So anyway, let's try to fix it. There are ways to fix it. I think once we get beyond this election, we might see more of a willingness for both sides to work together. Yeah.
Just more on the immigration. It's in light of the First Lady's marriage, just getting their citizenship, is the whole concept of ending immigration or chain migration. Is that now off the table?
I don't think it's off the table. We, in the bill that we brought forward, there were a lot of us, and I'm in the camp that said, let's end chain migration beyond the, if you're here, you can bring your children, but should you be able to bring your brother and your cousin and your 35-year-old married brother's kids and all that? Chain migration literally is the biggest thing that clogs up the legal line. So you hear about people that are waiting 10 years to come here legally, or in some cases 25 years, because we have caps on certain countries. So Mexico might be able to bring in more people than India can bring in. So we have these caps. And so somebody that, like, literally you and I walk in and like file our papers, and not a real line, but there's a virtual line. So if you and I both file on the exact same day to become an American citizen, depending on the country we're from, you might wait 10 years and I might wait 25. Why? That makes no sense. So let's get rid of the caps and reform chain migration. So we were able to get an agreement to not completely get rid of chain migration, but to reform it dramatically, where you can reduce that number. And you can use that to move more merit-based people and get rid of the country caps that make no sense, so that everybody that's waiting in line now, maybe you're waiting 15 years, that wait now can maybe be an 8-year wait instead of a 15-year wait if you reform chain migration. So there's still a strong desire to fix it. It's broken. Anybody that looks at it will tell you it's broken. How do you fix it? Those of us that would like to repeal it completely, the votes aren't there. But there are votes, I think, there to reform it in a dramatic way.
And just as a follow-up, is the president looking to fix it or to end it?
He supported the plan. He supported the plan to reform it. So when we finally brought, and there's two different bills we brought to the floor, he supported both of them. They both addressed it in a different way, but the way we addressed chain migration in those two bills was very similar. And the president supported both of those. So while he might like to go further, and he would, he understands if he can't get the whole thing, at least make some reforms to it that make sense. And he supported that. In the back hall.
I'm David Gerber. I'm a new resident in your district. I'm the newest rabbi in the New Orleans area. And as a rabbi, I'm used to working with people who disagree. If there's people who disagree more than congressmen, it's Jews.
I love listening to those debates.
So we are people who have a religion built on disagreement, and in fact, talking with people who disagree with us is how we get more correct and on the right path. So I commend what you said about a goal to have less vitriol in the political dialogue. And as somebody who's kind of starving for moderate voices, and especially in election year when every advertisement is not building ourselves up but putting others down, my question is, you know, these things you mentioned about working with Democrats, that makes me more likely to vote for a candidate, to know that they're comfortable reaching across the aisle. And I'm also a new Twitter follower of yours, as of the last 8 minutes.
Hopefully you haven't been reading any in the last 8 minutes, because I'm here. I'm not tweeting as I'm speaking to the Rotary Club. Maybe I'll tweet later about speaking to the Rotary Club.
So my question is, and I'm going to throw a little bit of Talmud out here.
Just no vitriol.
No vitriol. The Talmud. So Talmud is our second most sacred document, and it says, in a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. And I don't know of any politicians who are on Twitter, or on social media, who are actively touting their ability to work across the aisle. Is that something that you would start doing? I would love to see politicians tout how they're able to reach across the aisle and cooperate and coordinate. And as a voter, I'd love to see more of that.
I did that especially during the flood debate just a few weeks ago. That was the last real big battle we had, and it wasn't a battle between Republicans and Democrats. It was between some Republicans and some Democrats, but it was somewhat geographic. But those boundaries have even broken down. In the NFIP, the flood insurance program, every single state, all 50 states have people that participate in the flood insurance program. So it's not just coastal. Somebody says, oh, it's just you people along the coast. I had colleagues from Pennsylvania, from Colorado, from Iowa, saying, look, how can I help you get the flood insurance program renewed? Republican and Democrat. And so I do think we need to talk about that more. And again, it doesn't mean you compromise your views. I mean, we all have passionate beliefs, but not all those beliefs are categorized in the Republican versus Democrat area. You hear about that mostly, but the stuff that we work on that is bipartisan, we need to feature that more too.
So, just to follow up really quickly, as a Twitter follower, tell me about those things. The only way I can hear it from you is the news doesn't cover bipartisan cooperation.
Right, and I've tweeted about some of those things. You'll see as you're following me on Twitter, you'll see more of that and some of that stuff you won't see in the mainstream media.
So,
Yeah.
so how do you see when the fall elections happen, let's just say the Democrats take control?
Oh my God. The room split clearly, but I think they'll probably know where I would like that to resolve itself.
Exactly, but how do you see now, the president's agenda and y'all's agenda as leaders of the Republican Party, and what's going to happen, going down the next 2 years? Especially?
Yeah, I surely would like us to see a continued focus on getting the economy back on track. I mean, we're starting to see really good economic growth. And keep in mind, we had gone 8 straight years where every single quarter, the GDP growth was less than 2%, which is anemic. I mean, that's beyond recession and depression era terms. I mean, even when we have depressions, they don't last that long. And so people have just become accustomed to that. That's as good as we can do. And all of a sudden now you're seeing an economy where if you look today at the economic numbers, there are more people looking to hire workers than there are people looking for jobs. That's a good thing, but it means we need to focus more on the workforce. And so I think we need to go to the next step. You're going to see us in September bring a tax cuts 2.0 package, because under Senate rules, the way we passed the bill, because there were no Democrats, we had to pass it under something called budget reconciliation, meaning it's a very narrow law going back to 1974 that allows you once a year to pass a bill through the Senate with only 51 votes instead of 60. Because they didn't have 60 votes to pass the tax cut bill, but we were able to get it passed with 52 in the Senate. But because of Senate rules, some of those tax cuts had to be temporary. So right now you're seeing great economic growth. Some of the tax cuts are permanent, and people can make good long-term decisions based on that, but some of them only last 6 years. So what you're hearing from a lot of people in different industries is, hey, look, I'd love to make some of the same long-term investments in buying large equipment, spending billions of dollars on a new plant, but I'm under the 6-year part of the tax cut bill. I don't have that certainty. Can you make that permanent too? And we want to make it permanent. We're going to bring a bill to make that permanent in September, but then going beyond that, I do think we need to have a stronger focus on workforce. And some of it involves welfare reform. In the Farm Bill, you can see, we have a bill right now farm bill that's moving through, that right now under the food stamp program under TANF, they literally had gotten rid of the work requirements that were very successful in helping people have a safety net, but not that kind of permanent welfare program. And look, at a time when companies are looking for workers, right now we're paying people over $30,000 a year not to work. Does that make sense if somebody's able-bodied? Now, I'm not talking about the single mom that's got 5 jobs. I'm talking about somebody who's fully able-bodied, who doesn't have any kids, who just chose not to work. Now, in America, you can choose not to work, but don't ask me to pay for it. Why should the taxpayer have to pay? If there's a company looking for workers and you're making the choice not to work, should you be able to be on public assistance for that? If you come on hard times, there absolutely ought to be a place for you to land, and there is. But we have a bill now to put work requirements in place. We need to strengthen our workforce. That's something we're going to continue focusing on. Regulatory certainty. Look, the regulatory state in DC had gotten out of control. I mean, DC, when the entire country, going back from the 2008 meltdown through the recession, DC was the only boom town in America. Because there was regulations out of control, every agency was growing, and we were killing manufacturing in America because there was not only no certainty, there were political agendas being carried out. Now, a regulator should not be somebody in place to go and carry out a political agenda. They should be there to enforce the law and only the law. And it had gotten way beyond that, and I think you're seeing now in every agency. The agencies get back under control. Just looking at the Department of Interior, which deals with drilling offshore. You ought to have safety standards in place, and there are very strong safety standards in place, stronger today than there were before Deepwater Horizon. But you also need to have certainty so that some company can go and invest $1 billion or $2 or $3 billion to go and drill and hire, by the way, a whole lot of people and generate the money that we need to restore our coast. And so you're seeing that what Ryan Zinke has done, and I served with Ryan in the House. He was on my deputy whip team, and we're very good friends. He's actually done, and a lot of these other cabinet secretaries have done, I think, really important things to keep the certainty in place. We've worked with them in Congress to do that. We need to continue to make reforms to the regulatory state going forward. And we got to get spending under control. And by getting spending under control, it doesn't mean just on the discretionary side, which are the things that Congress directly appropriates. The non-discretionary side as well. And I'm talking about Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. If you look right now, Medicare and Medicaid both are going bankrupt. I mean, Medicare, in the next 8 years, under the current plan, if no law has changed, the Medicare actuaries, and this goes back to Barack Obama's Medicare actuaries said this, today's Medicare actuaries both say, if we change nothing, if we leave it alone, Medicare goes bankrupt in 8 years. More people across the country need to understand that, how severe this problem is. Now, we've got a plan to reform that, to reform Medicare so we can save it from bankruptcy and make sure that seniors aren't impacted in any way. And there's a lot of ways to do it. It shouldn't be a partisan plan, by the way. But we ought to all first recognize just how serious that problem is, and that's something we need to keep focusing on as well. Yeah.
Hi.
I think we're getting close to.
Yeah, we are getting close. Why don't
Can we do one more?
yeah, one more and then.
All right, you
I'm
get
in the
five.
healthcare
Stay
business.
later.
You just talked about Medicare. And one of the challenges in healthcare, and this is not an attack on healthcare reform, whatever you want to call it, but our system is broken. And one of the things is Medicare is paying much less proportionally for care
Than
than
private
the
insurance.
commercial sector.
Yeah.
I mean, 2.5 to 5 times as much in the commercial sector for Medicare. When you talk about Medicare, you want to reform Medicare, but reforming Medicare is not likely to yield more payment for Medicare. And how is
But
the commercial
reforming
sector-
Medicare needs to involve solvency. Medicare becomes insolvent if we do nothing in 8 years. That's my biggest concern. Because if you're a current senior and you're 89 8 years from now and it goes bankrupt, it impacts current seniors under current law. I don't want that to happen. I think it would be irresponsible for us to sit back and watch it. What we need to do, and believe me, the other side, there is a different approach to this. You hear a lot of people now saying Medicare for all. Now think about what Medicare for all means. And Nancy Pelosi's talking about this, a lot of others are talking about it. So you're talking about taking a program that's literally gone bankrupt in 8 years and putting another 200+ million people on it. In private insurance, as you know, private insurance makes up the difference. You know, so the cost shifting that happens in healthcare, it's paid for primarily by the private insurance marketplace, which needs to get even healthier, needs to get wider. We need more people on private insurance because it makes up the difference for Medicare and Medicaid. If you go Medicare for all, their plan, and there's a bill out there to do this, it's not just some theoretical thing, it dumps over 200 million more people on Medicare and it gets rid of private marketplace for healthcare. So if you're already getting underpaid by Medicare, imagine putting another 200 million people on that program, the system collapses. And you can see how it collapses real quickly. And by the way, it's a system that's already collapsing. So there is a different approach, a very different set of approaches on how to solve this problem. But it's a major problem. You sure don't solve it by putting 200 million more people on a program that's going bankrupt. Anyway, I know that's the last question. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.